Welcome to Salvation by Grace, a broadcast ministry of Grace Christian Assembly, a Sovereign Grace Fellowship in Smyrna, Tennessee. For more information, we invite you to visit our website at www.salvationbygrace.org. Now let's join our teacher, Jim McClarty.
Napping, you can get them up and check with them. Did you see Jesus? Wake up. Verse 7 then says, after that he was seen of James, then he was seen of all the apostles, and then last of all, he was seen of me also as of one born out of due time. In other words, he's saying that's a birth phrase that he's using, and he's saying, I'm like someone who was born into the family of God, born by the Spirit of Christ, in that instantaneous recognition when he was driving. He was driving. He was with all the apostles in one accord. And they were... Thank you. And so he was on them. I'm going to try to get you back. He was on the Gaza Strip when the light shined out from heaven. The voice said, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? He said, who are you, Lord? He said, I am Jesus. He said, that was like someone who was being born out of due time, that I didn't deserve this. I certainly wasn't expecting it. I'm out there killing Christians, and suddenly the new birth strikes me. So he said, last of all, he was seen of me as one born out of due time. Now, keep a hold of that verse 8 there of chapter 15, because we're going to use that verse later when we talk about the word last and last of all. Because later we're going to talk about the last trump. There are folk who are going to use the phrase last trump to try to push the Christian church into the tribulation. And they use the last trump language to do that with. But I'm going to abolish and destroy that argument later on for you. And we'll be using that verse to do it with, because Paul just said he was seen last of all by me. The question is, did anybody ever see Christ after Paul? After Paul saw him, did anybody else in the biblical account see Jesus? John saw him on the Isle of Patmos, right? So Paul can't possibly be saying, after I saw him, nobody else ever gets to see him, right? What he said was, last in a series. He was seen, he was seen, he was seen, and last in that series, he was seen by me. And that's exactly the way Paul is going to, in this same letter, use that same word to say that at the last trump, Christ will appear. And people jump up and say, oh, last trump, well, in the book of Revelation, there's 7 trumpets. And the 7th of those trumpets is the last one. And that happens toward the end of the tribulation. And there can only be one last. And that's the last of them. So, since there's only one last, the church goes through the tribulation, and the catching away doesn't happen to the last of those 7 trumps. The problem is that Paul then would be making reference to a book that wouldn't be written for another 50 years, which seems kind of odd, that he would write to the Corinthian church to assure them and say, and by the way, I'm making an odd reference here to a book that won't be written for another 50 years. That ought to confuse them. Secondly, he's using the word last as last in a series. He was seen, he was seen, he was seen, he was seen last by me. And then there are trumpets, and in the last of those series of trumpets, the catching away happens. And to the Hebrew mindset, there's only one place where there is a continuous blowing of trumpets and a last trump. And it is very specific, the last trump. And that's at the Feast of Trumpets. So it's clear from the Pauline mindset that he's referring to Feast of the Trumpets there, not referring to the book of Revelation, which hadn't been written yet. But that's another argument. Okay, now, he was seen last of all by me as one born out of due time. I'm in verse 9 now. Now he's going to explain what he means when he says that I was as one born out of due time. He says, for I am the least of the apostles, and I am not meet, or it is not appropriate that I even be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. It always astounds me when I read the attitude that we were talking about Sunday, John the Baptist. He must increase, I must decrease. There's one coming after me whose shoe latchet I'm not worthy to unloose. That attitude of humility. Here's Paul, who actually did see Jesus, who actually was converted by Jesus personally, who was blinded, who did go into a city, and a man said, I knew you were coming, prayed over him, he got his sight back. He spent 3 years in the desert with Jesus, being personally taught the mysteries he would reveal to the Gentile church, and his attitude is still, I don't deserve any of this. I don't deserve to even be called an apostle because I persecuted the church. I mean, in this day and age, if anybody even pretended they saw Jesus or were personally converted by him, they'd have a worldwide ministry with a huge platform and the likes. They'd be on TBN every night. It'd be the Joe Schmo show, and everybody'd be all excited. I saw Jesus! I saw a guy one time on TBN. Oh, here I'm telling stories. See how easy that was? There's a guy on TBN one time, this old man, who claimed to have been to heaven and came back. And he was describing the streets of gold, and he was describing the pearly gates, and I'm going, well, that's easy. You know, the Bible uses some of that language, you know. Okay, give me something I don't know. Convince me. He turns to Paul Crouch and goes, and Paul, I saw you in Jan's mansion. I saw your mansion. Well, they're all, you know, woo, woo, over, you know, I saw your mansion. Well, the word translated in the King James mansion actually just means dwelling places. It doesn't mean mansion to begin with. You're not going to get there and get like the Beverly Hillbillies house, you know. You're not going to, I know, now I'm not going. Get my coat. What he said was, in my Father's house there are many dwellings. Right, exactly. I'm wondering who the tour guide was. Exactly. Like the tour guide would go, you know, and on your right, Paul and Jan from TBN, that mansion right there. So, I know. But the point is, this guy couldn't wait to bask in his own egocentricity and say, oh, I saw heaven, and oh, Paul and Jan, oh, and they're hooting and hollering. Paul actually did see Jesus, did spend time with him, was personally taught by him, and his attitude, the real attitude, I guarantee you that if you have the genuine Spirit of God in here and Jesus walks through the front door, you're on your face instantly. The power of somebody like that being in your presence is going to drive you to your knees. And you're going to put your face in the dust in front of him. You're not going to run up and go, my man, you know, what's shaking in the heaven thing? You know, you're not going to say, oh, good, it's my homeboy. I remember those T-shirts in L.A., Jesus is my homeboy. You won't be saying that when he shows up. Paul said, I've seen him, I know who I'm dealing with, and I don't even deserve to be called an apostle. The complete opposite attitude that you see so pervasively in the church these days. Verse 10 says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. Took no credit for it. The only thing he took credit for was, I deserve nothing. I shouldn't even be an apostle. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain. But I labored more abundantly than all of the other apostles. Yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me did these labors. Verse 11, therefore, whether it were I or they, so we preach, and so you believed. Now, verse 12. Now, if Christ is preached that he rose from the dead, how say some among you that there is no resurrection of the dead? Now he's beginning his actual treatise. How is it that some of you will contend that there is no resurrection if we have witnesses that Christ resurrected? I've got my 500 witnesses. You can go wake them up and check with them. And they will tell you that they saw Jesus walk and talk. Now you know that he was a man. You know that he died. You know he was buried. And I'm here to tell you he resurrected. And then he's saying, check me out. Check with the witnesses. He is resurrected. And if he has resurrected, how is it that some people will argue that there is no resurrection? We have a clear example now of a resurrection. That's Paul's argument.
On behalf of everyone at Grace Christian Assembly, we thank you for listening to this week's Salvation by Grace message. Remember to visit us on the internet at www.salvationbygrace.org. And we invite you to join us next time when we gather around the Word and study the sovereign grace of God.